Go ahead and kick it off. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm very happy to introduce Paul Estes. For over 20 years, Paul has held leadership positions at Dell, Amazon, and Microsoft, where he led a team of HR, procurement, and legal trailblazers to launch Microsoft's gig economy freelance program. Paul is currently MURAL's Chief Community Officer. MURAL is the leading digital workspace for visual collaboration in enterprise. And Paul, we'd love to hear you talk about that as well. In your work there, they work with global brands such as Spotify, Intuit, IDEO, IBM, Autodesk, GitHub, and Atlassian, and have up to tens of thousands of MURAL members collaborating with the platform each month, sharing ideas and best practices through a variety of templates, learning, and other content. In 2020 alone, over 5 million people started their visual collaboration journey with MURAL. Paul's team is responsible for supporting, educating, and empowering this community of imagination workers by connecting them with peers, partners, and on-demand facilitation experts. As most of you already know, Paul is an advocate for the talent economy, inspiring others to embrace their potential in the future of work. Each week, Paul provides insights and perspectives to nearly 100,000 readers on his LinkedIn newsletter, and I highly recommend subscribing to that. And he frequently shares his insights as a speaker and panelist. He has 9 pending patents in content and collaboration related to the on-demand economy. And you can find him on Twitter at Paul F. Estes. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for being here with us today.
And 2 of the patents have been granted. So it's 7 pending in 2. But anyway.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a truly exciting journey. So thank you so much for having me. And I hope that I can provide some insights, not only on where we are today, but a little history, which I think is important on where we've come from, the evolution of sort of independent work as it relates to the digital transformation that is now the gig economy. And then I have some very specific views, and I've written my latest article in TechCrunch on where I think we're going and where I think a lot of the opportunities are. If I was, especially for this audience, if I was thinking about where to start and provide value, I think there's a big change happening, and so hopefully I can provide some insights there. So Courtney, I will let you ask some questions, and hopefully we can go from there.
Wonderful, and I can see your book behind you. I think some people here would be familiar with it. So we're looking forward to you helping us get into the gig mindset.
It is, it's one of those things that it's a completely different, I mean, I say it in the intro of the book. I was a 3rd generation company man. My grandfather, World War II insurance salesman. My father worked in big tech and actually retired and got the proverbial gold watch. So he wears his gold retirement watch. And so for many years, I traveled that journey until one day, and I talk about it quite often, when I hired my first freelancer. And it fundamentally changed the way not only that I live, but the way I wanted to do work and the diversity that I wanted to be surrounded by. And so it was a pretty powerful thing. And I had a book in my head. And so anybody who's ever had a book in their head knows the struggle it is to get it out. And in the book, I talk about how I used freelancers and a process from Scribe Media to produce the book. And so it's sort of life imitating art in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. I did want to start, you've written extensively on how companies and individuals can engage with gig workers effectively and the value that brings, and now where the gig economy is headed. So I'd love to have you just share a little bit more about your background, how you developed your expertise in this area from that first experience, and also just lay some definition around what exactly the gig economy entails.
Sure. It's a 3-part question. First of all, I think, one of the things that I've noticed, I would go around when I started the Microsoft freelance program and talk to people about the future of work. Oh, the future of work, and this is where it's going to be. And what I realized is people weren't really interested in the future of work. They were somehow interested about yesterday, and this is before the pandemic, a lot worried about today, and then trying to stay relevant in the future. And so for me, it was, how do I reskill myself? I felt in many ways that I had spent 20 years in big technology. And I started, as I engaged with my first freelancer, to say, hey, wait, I can actually start to get more done. You know, the company, every big company or startup has constraints. And instead of looking at those constraints and saying, well, that's where we are, and there were different ways to get things done. And there were expertise. And now this just sounds commonplace, but for me, working in a big company 5 years ago, it wasn't commonplace that I could go to the internet and find somebody who had, you know, amazing talents in a specific area I needed. So it was somebody that, you know, had the machine learning expertise that I needed around the specific problem that I was looking for, or people that could do content creation for social media on, you know, a given platform. And those people weren't always available under the traditional staffing things that were available at the company. And so we started bringing in that expertise. The thing that I found and I didn't appreciate and was a learning for me is how hard it was to reskill myself, how hard it was to go from, you know, sitting in meetings in sort of this very structured way of doing things to being responsible for writing down expectations, for taskifying things, breaking work up into individual projects. The idea that I would have different experts doing amazing work and be responsible for stitching them together. When to know that a freelancer was a good fit, whether it's the way they communicated, whether it's the expertise they had. And so there's a massive amount of reskilling and rebooting of just how I approached problem solving, how I approached scaling myself, that I underestimated. It took years. And my wife will always tell the story, you know, when people say, oh, you have this book, and she goes, you didn't see him at 3 a.m. when he was, you know, figuring out websites that never launched or doing projects that were crazy and stuff. And so, you know, I as a person was never really good at taking really long, hour-long LinkedIn courses or Coursera courses or whatever. I had to sort of munge my way through by doing and working with people and learning from them. But I will say, having helped transform a number of different teams into this way of working, that if you believe it is possible, it's just a matter of learning and going through those steps. So that was my path to realizing that there was a different way of working, and that the world's a very big place. I mean, there's amazing people all around the world. But, you know, one of the freelancers that's been with me for the longest time is a gentleman named Tim who lives in Ghana. And he's the one that helps me do my newsletter every week. In fact, I think we're on our 85th version that just came out today. And he's been with me for the entire journey. And he's got a master's degree in statistics. And this is a project that he does to make some extra money. And so I would have never thought that I would be, you know, working so closely and so dependent on somebody as talented as Tim. And so I've got many stories about that. I forgot your second question.
So you were going to lay out some definition around the gig economy and what that entails when you think about it. And there is a question here in the chat that I wanted to dive into right after this. And the reason we asked you to do this talk at this time, and it's around some of the market signals that we're seeing right now and the Uber ruling in the UK. And so after we kind of lay out some of that definition and how you think about the gig economy, maybe we could jump straight into there and get some of your thoughts on the Deliveroo IPO. You know, I can.
It's not only the Uber ruling in the UK, it's the Uber ruling in California. It's the Uber ruling in Austin, Texas. It's, you know, there's this very interesting thing when you look at the opportunity of the gig economy and labor law. You know, labor law is a very complex thing. It's been around for a very long time. When you look at, you know, just the history of unions and, you know, tax collection, and you have all these very large and politically influenced groups trying to figure out how to evolve labor law to interact with technology. And the most famous, you know, thing that happened here in the United States is when Zuckerberg, I was, you know, talking to Congress, and he had to explain how Facebook worked. to one of the senators. And so you have this mismatch of sophistication in areas that are critically important to things like the technology of the gig economy really taking off. And some of it is, the big platforms wanting to give more support and stuff to the independent workers, but then they become afoul of laws that are not well formed. I was on a panel a while back with some lawyers who worked at pretty high levels of the government in labor law, and they're like, if anybody tells you that there's a clear answer to worker classification and a number of these different things around, there's not. It's being legislated at least in the United States, and even in the UK. Australia just had a big ruling as well, at the federal, state, and local levels, as people try to grapple with how to provide the right protections and the right framework for people that want flexibility and freedom, but also need some of the protections that go along with, call it health insurance, which is a major thing here in the United States, and in other places it's different. And so the regulatory environment has not caught up with the technology. And you see some well-funded companies being able to push against that and really try to move the conversation forward through the courts or through legislation. It's a messy process. I just look here in the United States at AB5. When it came out, it sounded like an interesting idea. And then you looked at the unintended consequences of AB5, how it impacted truck workers and writers and Hollywood, which is in many areas based on independent work. And so trying to figure that out, but at least the conversation is being started, and there's well-funded technology to help push that forward. When I look at Deliveroo, it's a really interesting one because it's not as simple as it sounds. There's a narrative that says, hey, Deliveroo, it's the workers and the workers' rights, and that's why no one was interested in the IPO, and it's why it's failed. I think there's some credence to that. I also think, is Deliveroo a great business model? When you look at the model and them taking a 25 to 40% take of everything, every food being delivered by someone, is that a good business model? Well, their current financials say that it's not a profitable business model. It's one that is growing. I think there was also some valuation concerns, the timing, Goldman and some others, and I think JP rolled it out, and you can question whether they did a good job around the pricing and stuff. So Deliveroo's performance, I think, is fairly complex, but it doesn't undermine what's happening with social media. One of the things that is really challenging for a lot of these companies is that if you look at them in aggregate, you say, hey, there's a lot of people that are participating in these marketplaces that are having a good experience, that are, look, yes, there will be continued push to get the salaries up and some in new constructs to give benefits and stuff like that. I think it was in Australia that Uber was even considering, and I say considering, minimum wage and meeting some of the country's requirements around labor. But it takes one or two bad stories to really paint a picture over the entire company and the entire model. And so I think it's social media is really amplifying some of the challenges. And I'm not saying that there aren't real challenges, but there are some pretty real challenges. I think you asked a good question around, or someone asked a good question around, if I was a startup today, how should I think about the gig economy? And there was a really good article by Andrew Chen and team over at AZ16, the Andreessen blog, and they have a great podcast, by the way, that I listen to often. And they talked about the evolution of marketplaces. I don't know if you've seen the uncoupling of Craigslist, which just shows the verticalization of all of these different things and how they were digitized. We went into the sort of Uber of X of everything that was kind of, and still is in some ways, how do I match people on demand and provide value and that sort of stuff. We've seen an explosion of just general marketplaces. Here's a, as it relates to human capital. But when I look at the gig economy, I think there's a choice that startups need to look at. And there's three specific things that I would mention. Number one, there's two sides. There's the business to consumer, and that's the one we're mostly familiar with, that's seeing significant growth, whether it's Deliveroo or Uber or even Airbnb, and in some of these models that disintermediate and allow people to connect for rides, food, home, and many other things. And we're also seeing that happen, and I'll give you an example of IKEA, who purchased TaskRabbit. Right? TaskRabbit was a company that was here to help us complete tasks. And it seemed that in IKEA was there selling furniture that you can build on your own. Well, it seemed that not everybody wanted to build furniture, IKEA furniture, on their own. And so you see a company like IKEA saying, hey, I need to have, an end-to-end connection with my customers as they're trying to accomplish something. One company that does this amazingly well at scale is Amazon. Amazon has a number of different, I would say, gig economy type of programs baked into their general operations. You can look at flex drivers. We can now get things in an hour. And so a lot of the flex drivers that deliver packages here in my neighborhood, and I'm sure in many other countries, are independent workers. They have Mechanical Turk, which is a service that helps work on AI or do labeling or provide, product stuff. They also have Amazon IQ. So if you're trying to set up your cloud instance, you can press a button and there's a certified Amazon expert there to help you, who gets, security enabled access to your instant and can help you really get things going. And so, and many others as they continue, but adding people into operations, and I don't only mean employees, independent workers, is sort of part of their DNA, and they have a lot of different programs.
Yeah.
As I look at companies in the business to business space, there's a bunch of examples where companies are starting to add people into operations as they become responsible for the end outcome. Right? If I get a car, Uber is responsible for delivering me from A to B. How they do that is, science. They curate these people. They have an algorithm that matches and all sorts of things based on ratings. And, it's a complex system, but they're responsible for the outcome. And so I'll give you a couple of examples that are in a few articles that I've written. And the one that I talk most about is TurboTax Live. So when you go to Intuit and you try to do your taxes, as I've tried to do before in my life, you always get to a part where you're not really sure. The tax code's changing every day based on legislation here in the United States. And so they put experts in the product. You're one click away from getting a certified CPA to help you answer your tax questions. In fact, 3 years ago, they had an amazing commercial on the Super Bowl, and they've been doing it in sports and stuff recently. Like, did they really add people to software? And they have this thing where they go, oh, you get a CPA and you get a CPA. And so the idea that Intuit was able to pivot from just providing a SaaS product to providing an integrated experience where certified CPAs were available on demand was interesting. Now you go look at their QuickBooks example, and now they're putting, accountants on demand in QuickBooks. I can press a button, they get access. These are certified, qualified QuickBook experts. And they're also now doing some HR experimentation where you can get an HR person for a small business on demand within the experience. I'm a big fan and talk a lot about Stitch Fix. In fact, my entire family now, my daughters have just joined Stitch Fix, but those are stylists who are augmenting the algorithms and the things that I give the platform. But that human in the loop is still an unbelievably critical part when it comes to the curation of what I want to wear, what my daughter may want to wear. We're seeing it with, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Paul, if I can, I think it forays well into the next question I see here in the chat. From the gig workers perspective, what percentage of them are actually making a meaningful income or a living wage on platforms like this? Fiverr is given as an example here, which I know is extremely global. And what's your point of view on whether these platforms are really democratizing access to opportunity?
I think that it's a really good question, and it's complicated. I think there are, I think there are three things. One is, what are the freelancers using the platforms for? So am I just digging in to get some extra money? I have an amazing researcher that I use who lives in India, Kosher, and he does some of the best work as far as market research and things like this. And this is a side hustle for him. So he has a job, a full-time job as an IT person, and is really passionate about market research. And so this is a side job that he's doing. I think he may have dreams to do this full-time, but right now it's that. And so if you looked at his earnings on the platform, you would say, well, that's not a living wage, but it doesn't take into account that he also has another job. I think there are people that do make living wages. And I think, Courtney, you said a very good question is, but what is a living wage in each company, in any country? When I had my first interaction with Tim, who I mentioned earlier, he was in Ghana, I spent a lot of time saying, hey, explain to me what a living, like, I have no idea on how to pay you, living wage for, or how do I even validate and pay for this work that we've scoped. And so we had a long conversation about what a living wage it was in Ghana, what sort of jobs tried to pay, and we landed on a number that I believe was, good for an above market rate in Ghana for the work that was done. I think third is you have to separate in some ways the different types of platforms. When you look at major platforms like Uber and Deliveroo that are very specific and very narrow in the model that they provide and the algorithm and the costing and stuff that is, monitored by the company, versus platforms where freelancers are able to say, hey, look, this is what my services are worth. Are you willing to pay that? Let's have a conversation and scope it. And so the platforms differ. I think the third thing that I've learned is, in some ways it's up to the people that are engaging the freelancers to understand. When I first started, I had no idea how to pay. Like, I wanted these projects done and I didn't have any idea of how to pay, whether I was overpaying, whether I was underpaying. That wasn't the platform's challenge. That was me not understanding. I know what it's like to hire a full-time employee. If I'm going to hire a developer or a data person or a program manager or marketer, like those sort of rates at the full-time level are well understood, and HR organizations sort of help scope them based on level. But when it comes to independent workers and project-based work specifically, there's a big learning curve where there may be unintended consequences that are really not the platform's fault specifically. Now, you could say there's more they could do, and of course there is, but that's one of the things that I've had to be very specific about when engaging freelancers, of saying, hey, let's talk about where you live, what your situation is, how to think about pricing this work versus just trying to get to the lowest bid. The thing that always sticks in my head is something my father told me, and Dad, if you ever see this, you were right. You get what you pay for. And that's true no matter what so, if you're trying to go to the lowest bidder to get some work done, you're going to get what you pay for. And so I've tried to throughout my journey, figure out how to interview for project-based work and how to put the right price tag against that work. And I think the platforms are starting to try to be helpful there. But there's a lot of education that we have to do as people wanting to engage, independent workers, especially in the business to business space. So I put it on us as much as the platforms.
Yep. And there's a great question here in the Q&A that I want to get to, but right before that, just while we're on this topic, can you speculate at all about how investors think about how companies pay their gig workers, and how they might, even if it's only an internal conversation, how they might evaluate that as well?
I think it goes back to the regulatory stuff. I mean, I think when you talk about pay, I think, a lot of companies, I'll just go, there's a great example in the hardware world, right? I used to work in hardware and for a lot of different hardware products. And there used to be a lot of challenges in the supply chain around child labor and bad working conditions and all of those things. And the day that the light was shown upon, hey, Apple, and I'm not picking on Apple, but like lots of different hardware companies saying, hey, at tier 2 and tier 3 down your supply chain, there's some things that are happening we're going to hold you responsible for. I think that taught a lot of companies that they're responsible for trying to figure out how to do these type of engagements or these type of things responsibly. And so I think that large organizations who have sophisticated HR departments and sophisticated contingency programs that deal with independent workers are all looking at this and saying, hey, now this is project-based work. This is a little version of digitally transformed contingent staffing. What are our rules and how do we look at to do this in a responsible way? And I think the more and more enterprises start to experiment and start to make this a part of their operations, the more they will do this responsibly and really try to understand it at the organizational level versus having individuals in the company trying to solve it for themselves.
Awesome. There's a question here in the chat. One of our listeners is interested to hear about good practices and tips in growing the supply of contractors of a marketplace in the current economy. Regulations, subsidies, unemployment benefits are making recruitment much harder than in past years. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that. And I would like to foray this idea of practices and tips and growing your freelance pool into, I've seen in a lot of your writing, you've said not having a gig economy strategy in 2021 is like missing the internet trend in the 90s or the mobile revolution in 2010. So directing our conversation into what exactly does it look like, especially for companies that are early stage or aren't engaging with gig workers regularly yet. What does that look like to have a gig economy strategy? So, whatever tactical advice you have for us here today.
Sure. So can you just repeat the first question? Because then I got excited about the second one.
Yeah. So interested to hear about good practices and tips in growing the supply of contractors of a marketplace in the current economy. Regulations, subsidies, unemployment benefits are making recruitment much harder than in past years.
Yeah. So let me separate two things. I think there's a war for talent going on. Like I'm actively trying to hire, a data PM and some pretty specialized skills. And so it's a real challenge in general, whether we're talking about full-time employment or independent workers. I think there's a couple of things that are pretty common for all of us. And I think it's people want to work in an environment where they feel valued, where they feel that they're going to be able to receive a fair wage, and where communication is going to be transparent. And I think that's with teams, whether they're freelancers or not. And so I've always tried to create an environment where I can talk to the freelancers that I engage with and let them know, hey, look, over the next couple of months, these are some projects, or hey, we're slowing down on this. And those kind of conversations at a human level go a long way. I think when you're able to, and a lot of the platforms now have the ability to provide tip or extra, compensation for work well done. Well, everybody in a company who gets used to be gold star bonuses or whatever those things are, don't forget that those things are still important out, even if it's an independent worker, and sometimes even more important because they don't get that recognition. I think a lot of people run the risk of treating these engagements very transactional, and that's a recipe for kind of failure. I think when you look at building communities, and so when you have if you have a freelance strategy and you have a number of different freelancers, how do you enable that community? How do you create energy where they're all helping each other, feeling that they have other people that they can lean on and ask questions? How do you figure out how to, reward exceptional behavior, or even highlight exceptional behavior? Write articles about some of the work that they're doing so that they may get additional work, or use those articles to show some of the work they've done. And so I think there's just a human element that sometimes, and it's easy to fall into the transactional nature of project-based work. I've got this project, I light up this project, I shut down this project. What I always advocate is you're building a network, and when I've gone to new jobs over the past, I'd say 6-7 years, a lot of freelancers come with me. And so when I show up and somebody goes, well, can you boot this up in a month? I'm like, 100%. And then you activate the team that you've been working with. And so just like any networking, that pool of amazing experts is something that you have to invest in and curate. And I don't think that's different than how you should treat colleagues or partners or anything else. I think the second part you mentioned was more of the regulatory environment. And I think for me, it's really hard to speak to the regulatory environment. One, because it's not landed. Two, it differs by state and country and all of that sort of stuff. And so I do think those things are real. And I think in many ways, freelancers are trying to figure out how to navigate the decision to become a freelancer themselves. They could be side hustling. It could be a second job and, hey, they're doing this on the side. They could be someone where they have a spouse who has a full-time job and the health insurance is covered. There are lots of people who are freelancing by themselves and don't have, health insurance and have to figure that out. And I think there are a lot of people, trying to solve that cohort of people. And so it's not as easy as saying, everyone's a freelancer. It's very, very complicated, and everybody approaches independent work from a different personal perspective.
And on that note, Paul, here in the chat, there's a great question. What are your thoughts on systems and platforms assisting gig workers in making better choices to maximize their income? Do you think such third parties will play a crucial role in the gig economy?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen look, we'll talk about Upwork and Fiverr in the business to business space. Both of them have Fiverr's created Fiverr Pro, which is, a thing that you can reach, which, certifies you at a higher level and demands higher pricing. And by the way, connects you with better clients, better paying clients, bigger named clients, more consistent work. And Upwork has the same thing with enterprise, right? And so they have a group of people that, hey, you've proven that you can deliver high results to some of our core clients. And, working with these clients is just easier in some regards. You can have higher impact. The pay and the stuff is markedly better. And so I do see these platforms trying to take not only data, but also client feedback anecdotally, and creating programs that allow independent workers to work with larger companies that help solve some of the problems in working with smaller companies.
And I do want to remind everyone, we've got about 8 minutes left in our conversation. So this is a great time for Q&A. Please feel free to send your questions through the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be reading those out. But Paul, I don't know if we got fully into this yet. You said you were excited to talk about what a gig economy strategy looks like. And I'm curious what your advice would be to startups, early stage startups. What do they need to be thinking about today in terms of a gig economy strategy, even if it's not part of their core business model? I think when we think about working around gig economy or gig workers, we think of Uber still sometimes. And so it's definitely evolved past that point. And what do you think founders should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I'll give you a number of different examples. I don't know how many people use Grammarly. I use it all the time. It helps me, do a lot of my writing and a lot of my work. And now Grammarly has the ability to get a Grammarly expert. And so you can press a button and get a writer to help you. And so when you look at that, Grammarly is basically an AI platform, right? They take a bunch of data, they take a bunch of signal from us, and they try to predict how to do better writing. And they're getting better by the day, because now they can rewrite full sentences for me better than I could have written them. But they also then provide people, because they know that the people who are writing may actually need a professional writer who has those expertise. You go and you look at things like GoDaddy, building a web page. For most people, pretty easy, but for some people, spinning up a WordPress web page instance and all the plugins and all the things, it's kind of hard. And so they have GoDaddy Pro Connect. And so when I talk about integrating a gig economy strategy into your core operations, I believe that companies are now going to become responsible, and this is one of the things that the on-demand, to deliver the full outcome. It's no longer good enough to just give me a SaaS product and say, hey, good luck. I wish you the best. Oh, we have this help forum over here. We have some YouTube videos. I think, and I believe, and we're seeing lots of companies start to integrate on demand. We're also seeing companies build that into, so, healthcare, which we could go on about for a long time. It used to be that you had to go to the doctor's office. Well, telemedicine is here. Telemedicine is not going anywhere. About 60% of all office visits can be done remotely. And so many of the doctors, and I've used the service a bunch of times, are independent doctors. Those are freelancers. I run a bunch. I sprained my ankle, and I went to go see if it was broken. Well, my doctor from Teladoc, who was an independent doctor, said, hey, you should go get an x-ray. I went and got an x-ray. That x-ray was sent from the facility to an independent radiologist who looked at the x-ray and then gave us the results. Well, both of those were independent workers, sewn into the operations of healthcare. And if you look at therapists, Talkspace is another example where in mental health is a significant issue right now. It used to be you had to go search the web or ask your friends, which is fairly odd to go and say, I have a mental health issue. Hey, do you have a psychologist? And it broke down the boundaries of location. And so when I think about having a gig economy strategy or incorporating independent experts, it's not just people who can do social media posts for you. We're seeing it across the entire spectrum of business, whether it's technology, whether it's healthcare. My Nike app now is, I was going to buy some running shoes the other day, and they prompted me for an on-demand Nike expert who helped me pick out my running shoes. And so it's kind of like when you buy a new car and you're like, nobody has this car until you get the new car. And then you're like, everybody has my car. You start to see it wherever you go. And at MURAL, one of the things that we're excited to launch is, experts on demand that can help you either facilitate or coach you how to do remote workshops and remote meetings, which is one of the main struggles companies are having as they go digital and do digital transformation. And so it's another example of us putting people in software against a core business, which is selling our SaaS product, our visual collaboration SaaS product.
That's interesting. This is kind of a fun one that came up in the Q&A, a real-time problem solve. So someone wanted to ask about their own company. They run a Q&A platform, in parentheses, it says Stack Overflow Clone on mathsgee.com, mathsgee.com. People are just reading the questions and answers. How can I get them to actually become active users as gig workers?
That is I'm not as familiar with the platform, but I've run into, and I'll give you an example, and I think it's public. There's a company called Directly, and one of the main challenges Fortune 500 companies were having, and I'll use Samsung as an example because it's one of their case studies, was these Q&A forms were meant to help reduce support calls for companies, right? I'd go there and I could find my answer, but they weren't getting the engagement that they needed. They had, they'd have some call center people that were trying to do it. And what Directly was able to do is say, hang on, how many fans does Samsung have in their community that love their phones or are passionate about some Samsung technology? And so Directly was able to create a business model that found members of the Samsung community and brought them into the Q&A forum. And the answers got better because these were fans. These weren't, call center people who were trying to catch the technology. These were people that were deeply passionate about it. They created an economic system, and they also created a system that allowed the best answer to always be at the top. So the forum quality got significantly better. The response times got significantly better, and the cost went down because these were people that were fans doing it in their spare time because they're community members of, that product. And so, one of the things I'm most excited about being a chief community officer is that there are so many more amazing ways that communities can be activated and actually, integrated into companies besides just a community forum. And so, I just had a leadership team meeting this morning, and, the things that we can do now, if we start to think more progressively and listen to how our community members want to participate. They're fans of MURAL and fans of the work that we do and want to help more people succeed. We just need to figure out how to enable those connections. And so I think you're seeing a couple of trends. You're seeing community, which is a big trend coming up. Everyone needs a community. On demand, you're seeing customer success, and then you're seeing that data aspect of it. How do you collect this data and make it valuable?
And Paul, sorry to interrupt you. We might cut off here in just a few seconds. And so I wanted to thank you so much for being here with us today. We're excited to have you back in July. We'll be sharing that with everybody. Thank you so much for your insights today. It was
Thanks
really
a ton,
fun.
Courtney. I hope the conversation was helpful.
It was, definitely. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.